Father, we thank you for the grace and mercy that you extend to us day by day and moment by moment. We thank you for this time where we spent remembering the person and the work of Christ's birth, as well as considering the year that has gone past and the new year that is set before us. I ask and pray, Father, that you be gracious and merciful to us, that you would bless us in spite of our sin, in spite of our foolishness. I ask and pray that you would draw near to us so that we would draw near to you, that we would think, that we would speak, and that we would act in terms of you and your character as you have revealed to us in the inscriptured, infallible word. I ask and pray for our discussions this evening concerning Bethlehem. I ask and pray, Father, that what I have to say will be true. I ask and pray that what I have to say will help the men and women have a better grasp and understanding of Bethlehem and history that you have ordained and that you have brought about once again to help us have a better grasp and understanding of the person and work of the greater Son of David, the great Son of Bethlehem, Jesus Christ. We pray these things in his name. Amen. Now, I have some news and this, that, and the other. I do want to take care of a few things before I jump into this, and we will just jump into it. Just so you know, and you remember the Star of Bethlehem stuff we've talked about over the years, and I've mentioned to Ethelbert Bullinger, who's Bullinger's fifth great grandson, the great Swiss reformer. Just so you know, I was doing some research on him the past several days, and again, it's one thing to hold to some theology that is not correct, and then there's Nutsoville. And I want to do some more work on him. And there are certainly things I disagree with him. He was very big in the perfectionist movement. The man can reach a perfect sanctification on the earth. However, he also was a member, and he also gave lectures to the Flat Earth Society. Yes, I was shocked to find that out. It's only been the last several days I found that. I thought, you know what, I better say something to everyone. However, his book on the constellations, I do think is very solid. I do think there's much to consider there. Others like Sayce and others have written books as well. But I do want you to know those things, that he did have some theological skeletons in his closet. Yikes. So anyway, so there's that. Number two, and again, I've mentioned this in passing, and because of just where various things are at, and in history in the world today, and also at school, I'm thinking very, very seriously about over the summer of a breaking off of Genesis again, and we've talked about this, and going over eschatology in Matthew 24. I don't know if this is the time and place to discuss it. It is 6 months off. But I think most of you would want to do that. But please let me know what your thoughts are. Some of you have already been through this a lot, and so like Amanda's been through it a lot. Others of you, I don't know about Michael Caith, I don't know about you. Litzenberger's not here tonight, but I know some of you've been through these things quite a bit. Others, but not nearly as much. But you would like a review of things. So please share your thoughts with me, either face-to-face or Zoom or emails or text me or whatever. But I am thinking about doing a Matthew 23, Matthew 24 study over the summer. Probably running it 7 to 8 weeks. I cannot for certain the third week of August, I have to be gone. A&A weekend. So, but otherwise, I do think that's probably something a lot of people would like to review, or actually just have me go over, period. So the eschatology issues flowing out of Matthew 24 and the book of Revelation. So as we wrap up this discussion of Bethlehem, there's a lot of things. There are a couple things we didn't get to, and I had a list of, I think, 8 different subjects. and 7 different subjects. And we got to 5 of them. Yeah, we got to 5 of them. So other things maybe we could deal with next year with the Magi, the situations in the temple, perhaps with Simeon and Anna, perhaps the dedication to the temple. Maybe we could do that later. What the so-called census was, I do not think it was a census. This has been written about extensively. We can discuss maybe later what it appears to have been. The one thing you may want to be aware of, oh, and then Herod, we could do Herod again sometime. It's been a few years since I've done Herod. We may do it next year. Concerning the date of the birth of Christ, concerning the so-called census, the death of Herod is a big issue because we can date in terms of his death. However, and this is everyone knows this in the world of history for what that's worth, that much of, well, nearly all of the Roman records were destroyed by Augustus because the history records and the star charts did not point to him as being the promised Messiah. And of course, he claimed to be. His coins actually said Augustus Caesar, son of God. Augustus Caesar, soter. One of my classes in the middle of this stuff right now, where a lot of the discussion and titles of Jesus in the Gospels and in Paul's writings are actually are borrowed from Caesar. But we have this 10-year period, roughly 6 BC to 4 AD, which is complete chaos in Roman history. You can't make heads or tails out of it. It's right there smack dab in the time of the birth of John, the birth of Christ, the death of Herod. It's right smack dab in the middle of these things. And it is absolute chaos and confusion. And perhaps we could actually address that situation some other time. But this is why there is so much up in the air, so much debated over the birth of Christ. And some people really, of course, you have your 1 BC date, your 3 BC date. And I understand both those arguments. We didn't really do that this year. I didn't even have it on my list to deal with because I thought it would take 2 or 3 weeks just to begin to address it. You have the 6 BC people, the 6 BC crowd. Not that they're bad people. Maybe you're a 6 BC person. I just don't think the 6 BC date, it has way too many gaping holes in it. I understand why the issue comes with various celestial movements of the stars and comets and that sort of thing. And it just doesn't line up. So I think the 6 BC date is out. Together is Bethlehem, just Bethlehem. Let's go to the census too. We don't have time for this. There's an awful lot here. And my great concern as to how much of this do I actually read through in scripture, because there's some major passages. I don't know what you know about Bethlehem and what you do not know. The most famous passage, I suppose, apart from the birth of Christ, and we'll look at it a couple times this evening, is in Micah chapter 5, verse 2. Now, Micah, and without spending a lot of time dealing with his dating himself, and he tells us the names of the kings in which he was prophesying, but he would overlap with Hosea, with Isaiah. I would say that The middle years of his ministry of Micah would be like 735 to 715 BC. As we come up to the end of the 8th century, Isaiah would be close to the middle of the 8th century. And Micah could be as well, folks. It could easily go back to 750, 760 BC. That's very possible. And go up into the 7th century, into as late as 687, 686 BC. That's very possible. But it does appear as if the meat, as it were, of Micah's teachings, it appears to be, at least to me, around 735 to 715 BC. And we have here in Micah incidentally, for those, Micah is somewhat of a diminutive of the name. Is similar to Michael. Michael could be a statement or a question, who is like God. Micah would be a diminutive of who is like Jehovah. Yah, Micah, Yah, Jehovah. So Micah would be a diminutive of who is like Jehovah. So Micah chapter 5, verse 1. Now gather yourself in troops, O daughter of troops. Again, there's much more to this, but we don't have time. He has laid siege against us. They will strike the judge of Israel with a rod on the cheek. Once again, this picture of judgment and chastisement is very common in the prophets on Israel. But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are little among the thousands of villages and towns, though you are little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of you shall come forth to me the one to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth have been of old, from everlasting. And again, we've spent a lot of time on this off and on over the years together on this Genesis. I do believe this is going back to Genesis 3:15. Now we are going to return to this passage here later on this evening. But let's go ahead and begin to consider what this is all about. There are two Bethlehems. I think most of people know this, maybe you don't. There's the most famous one is in Judah, and then there's a less well-known one up in Zebulun. So let me go ahead, and I don't know how many people are familiar with this. That's why we're doing this, right? So there is Bethlehem. Beth is house. I think everyone knows that. Beth is house. Lehem is bread. So it means house of bread. And it's not unusual, not only in Israel, but also in other ancient Near Eastern civilizations and Middle Ages, even today, have several towns of the same name. Look at that in a moment. Sorry, I didn't. Oh, there it is. It's further down the page. Okay. Let me go ahead and share this with you. I believe everyone can see this. It's not the best of maps, but I like the color coding. This would, you understand that in roughly 1400 BC is the conquest of Canaan. Now, some people have 1407, but that's fine. But it's early 15th century is the conquest of Canaan. And the land from Dan in the north to Beersheba in the south, Beersheba. And we've talked about that before. Dan in the north, Beersheba in the south is just like saying from New York to Los Angeles, from east to west in America. This is often how Israel is described, from Dan to Beersheba. And we've looked at a lot of these places already. But notice the color coding: Ashur, Naphtali, and we've gone over this. These are the sons of Jacob and of Joseph: Issachar, East Manasseh, West Manasseh. Again, a lot of land there coming out of Joseph. Ephraim, Dan. Now, Dan is a city up here, a town. This is the area of the Danites down here. Simeon, of course, Judah. Now, Judah is very important here. Here's Judah. Reuben is here. And then Gad. The Moabites who are going to show up in the story are down here. So this is Zebulun up here. Just a little spit of land. They do not get much. Zebulun, if you'll recall, is the last son of Jacob and Leah. And right off of here, kind of where the E is at, this is where Bethlehem of Zebulun is. We see in Joshua 19:15 it is mentioned. Joshua 19:15. And this it begins actually in verse 10. This is there's several chapters here, and you may want to read them on your own. And it deals with the division of the land as Israel enters into a Canaan. Verse 10 starts with the land of Zebulun. The third lot, again, they're casting lots, and God is the one who decides who gets what land. The third lot came out for the children of Zebulun according to their families, and the border of their inheritance as far as Sarid. And it goes on and talks about it. And then you get to verse 15. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but just so you know where it's at. And the various towns that are being mentioned here were Katath, Nahalal, Shimron, Adalah, and Bethlehem. Do you see that? 12 cities with their villages. The villages would be kind of like this, we'd call them suburbs. Because they're surrounding, supporting economies. Okay? So that is the much less known Bethlehem of Zebulun. But this other Bethlehem of Judah, which is not on this map, but we're going to look at it later. So this Bethlehem Zebulun is up in this area here. Don't have a lot about it, but the Bethlehem Judah, of course, is down here. It's right in this area right here. This is again is about 1500 BC. Jebus, Jerusalem. Okay, makes sense. So concerning, you know what? Let's go ahead now. I can back. Let's go ahead and pull up a map. Oh, you know what? I want to show you another map. Sorry. I want to show you another Zebulun map. I know I have something else I want to show you. I thought this is kind of cool. It's a map from 1852. This is Zebulun again. This is not the famous one. This is Zebulun. And so here we zero in and that little spit of land we talked about. And so here's, like I said, here's Bethlehem up in here. I guess I was a little, so here's Zebulun. Here's the land of Zebulun, the town of Zebulun. I guess here's Nazareth down here. We all recognize Nazareth, don't we? And so then here's the Bethlehem up here. I think I was pointing Bethlehem's a little bit further south. So as far as I know, Bethlehem is right up in here. Okay. Ramah, Ramah's up there. So there's an awful lot of famous towns in this area. So, okay. And then we looked at that. You're still there? Okay. Ishmaelites. We have another file here. And there's another. This will be fine. I mean, there's another map I wanted to show you. Another map I wanted to show you, but that's fine. I don't see it right now. And so I think most of you will recognize this map here without the tribal divisions. So Galilee is going to be up in this area here. The Galilee is up here, the circuit. Idumea, the Edomites, Edom is down here. Here's Judah. Perea, so the east side of the Jordan, is over here. And then, of course, the so-called Sea of Galilee or Sea of Tiberias, or like I said, the harp. And so here's Nazareth up here in Zebulun, which we just looked at, correct? Here's the land of the Samaritans. Remember, Samaria was settled by the Assyrians and Babylonians, and they intermarried with the Jews of the area. And then Judah's down here. So you have, after the division of the kingdom, after the death of Solomon, we have Israel's in the north and Judah's in the south. And here's Bethlehem right here. Just about 3 miles from Jerusalem. So here's Jerusalem, here's Bethlehem. And so the travel from Nazareth would have been down along the King's Highway, which would have been heavily policed and heavily armed by soldiers. It's been fairly safe to travel, relatively safe. Enough that Jesus got lost, didn't he? This 12-year-old boy got lost on the way back to Nazareth. And that was okay. They weren't too concerned. And then to Jerusalem. So when Mary went through her rituals and Jesus was circumcised and dedicated at the temple with Anna and Simeon's, which we didn't really discuss, involvement, it's only a short walk it would have, they could have gotten that pretty quickly from Bethlehem to Jerusalem. And incidentally, I don't have it here, but then after when they would have fled from Herod, who's killing the children, they simply would have, there's a road here, and they would have fled. And we've discussed this with Abraham. Remember that? And they'd have gone into Egypt down here, and then they'd have turned, they probably went up the via Mara, the road along the Mediterranean, because the scripture says they knew that Herod Archelaus was in Jerusalem, so they wanted to avoid, they didn't want to go back this way. And so they had gone to Egypt, heard Herod the Great had died, Herod Archelaus was in his place, they wanted to go around him, and so they probably went up to Via Mara, back to Nazareth. Okay. So the Bethlehem we're talking about here is this Bethlehem right here. Again, Bethlehem means house of bread. Again, it's known as Bethlehem of Judah. Like I said, 3. I was going to say, yeah, it's about 6 miles from Jerusalem. I was going to say 3 miles. About 6 miles from Judah, which I can't talk about Jerusalem. Believe it or not, Bethlehem is roughly 100 feet higher than Jerusalem, 100 feet above, higher in terms of sea level. I can't remember what the exact number is, than Jerusalem. So it's kind of interesting. So in other words, you're up in the air, Bethlehem. It's the original term before the conquest in, like we said, 1400 BC was Ephrath or Ephrathah, Bethlehem Ephrathah, which we'll look at. EPHRATH, and sometimes EPHRATHAH. Ephrathah, which means fruitful. And this was the name of this area called Bethlehem. We're going to look it up in the Bible here. It's called Ephrath or Ephrathah before the conquest. It's an area, like I said, it means house of bread. It was a bakery town. It would have been surrounded by various fields of various grains, from the cheap stuff like barley to wheat to rye to flax. It also was surrounded with fig trees, olive orchards, and vineyards as well. So again, Ephrath or Ephrathah means fruitful. The land is very fertile there and had been for quite some time. We're going to look at a couple passages concerning its settlement. It's okay if I just leave the map up here. Again, feel free to talk with me. I'll leave the map up here. If you would please turn to 1 Chronicles 4:4. Again, Chronicles belongs at the you know what? 1 Chronicles 2. I knew that is somewhere. Begins the end of the Old Testament. 1 Chronicles chapter 2, and then we'll do chapter 4. I won't spend a lot of time on this because we could easily do that. Again, Chronicles is the history of the canonization of the Old Testament up to this point. So 1 Chronicles chapter 2, verse 51. Salma, now hang on to this, we're going to come back to this. Salma, the father of Bethlehem, and Haraph, the father of Beth Gader. In 54, the sons of Salma were Bethlehem, the Netophathites. That was a town just a couple miles away. Some of David's great, well, David's from Bethlehem, isn't he? And some of his great warriors, his great men, came from that area. Atroth, Beth Joab, the house of Joab, half the Manahites, Manathites, and the Zorites. So who is this father here? Salma is the father of Bethlehem. And then you look at chapter 4, the next couple columns over. This is where, how far down this road do I go tonight? Chapter 4, verse 1, the sons of Judah were Perez, Hezron, Carmi, Hur, and Shobal. Who remembers who Perez is? Anyone? That is the child that Judah has. We'll discuss this later on, is coming up here in the next several weeks, that he has with his daughter-in-law. That's who that is. And then verse 4, and Penuel was the father of Gedor, and Ezer was the father of Hushah. These were the sons of Hur, the firstborn of Ephrathah. Ah, there it is. The father of Bethlehem. And so what we see here very early on in Chronicles and the discussion of the land is we have these two men, Salma and Ephrathah, who are both called the father. Without spending a lot of time developing this and whatnot, this word father here is what we'd call a founder. We speak of the founding fathers of America. Makes sense. The founding fathers, we use both of the words in one breath. That's all this means. So there's more than one founder of this area. But notice here the name. We have both names here in this verse, Ephrathah and Bethlehem. So who in the world is this Salma? Anyone want to take a stab at who the Salma is? So where do I go over this? Right, we'll do it right now. Go to Ruth. Does Ruth have anything to do with Bethlehem? We have time, we'll develop that further this evening. I don't have it written down here. It's the very end of Ruth, though. I think it's the very end of the chapter. Oh, there we go. It wasn't the end. Let me see here. So Ruth chapter 4, now notice verse 18. Now this is the genealogy of Perez. Perez begat Hezron, Hezron begat Ram, Ram begat Abinadab, Abinadab begat Nahshon, Nahshon begat Salma. That's your Salmon. And who is Salmon's son? Fella by the name of Boaz, right? Recognize the name. And Boaz begat Obed, and Obed begat Jesse, and Jesse begat David, period, end of Ruth. Okay. So, yeah. Comments, questions? So that's a little bit of a background to Ephrath. Let me see here. We've done that. We've done that. Let's go ahead. And we're doing okay on time. Let's go ahead and once again go back to Micah chapter 5. And this very famous, the most famous prophecy, the most famous reference to Bethlehem, probably outside of the Gospels, outside of Matthew and Luke, which is the fulfillment of this, right? It's the fulfillment. So we're going back to Micah chapter 5, verse 2. Now, this again is well after the conquest by many centuries, by over half a millennium. Micah makes this very clear in his prophecy what Bethlehem he intends here. But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, through you, though you are little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of you shall come forth to me the one to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth have been from old, from everlasting. And again, I do believe that this is referencing ultimately back to Genesis 3:15. But then we also have some other references that would even predate the conquest. If you would please turn to Genesis 49:10. And I do believe we've already referenced this. These are Jacob's dying words as he is blessing all of his children. In Genesis 49:10, beginning in verse 8, Judah, you are he whom your brothers shall praise. Judah is to praise. Your hand shall be on the neck of all your enemies. Your father's children shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He bows down. He lies down like a lion. So again, the symbol, the constellation of Judah is the lion, Leo. And as a lion, who shall rouse him? And then here's your famous verse 10 passage. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh comes. And to him shall be the obedience of the people. And then again, we see the beginning of Holy Week here with Jesus and Matthew, binding his donkey to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. Of course, you see that image of Christ, right? That we see in John. He washed his garments in wine. We'll see that in Revelation. And his clothes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, his teeth whiter than milk. And then verse 13 goes into Zebulun. So we have this very, very famous passage here that the king is going to come out of Judah. but in particular, where in Judah? Well, it's Bethlehem. So if you would turn to 2 Samuel, 2 Samuel 7:13. Of course, dealing with David. Well, we'll pick it up in verse 12 here, okay? When your days are fulfilled and you rest with your fathers, I will set up your seed after you. Notice the singularity here. Who will come from your body. Again, think of the promises of Father Abraham that we've gone over. And I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father. He shall be my son, and so on and so forth. Again, we don't have time to develop all this. But this is very clear here that the great king is going to come from David. And where is David at? He's here in Bethlehem, as we see in Micah chapter 5. Other passages that deal with Bethlehem, some you may not be that familiar with. I want to first look at these passages before the conquest. Genesis 35, which we're getting ready to address sooner than later in our Genesis studies. Again, without reading the whole passage, you may want to read this on your own at home. Excuse me. Genesis 35, verse 16. And then they journeyed from Bethel, and when they were a little distance to go to Ephrath, Rachel travailed in childbirth, and she had hard labor. Well, that Ephrath there, that's Bethlehem. But at this time in history, it's called Ephrath, fruitful. Later, apparently after Salma and this other man by the name of Ephrath, it becomes known as Bethlehem, house of bread. Now it came to pass when she was in hard labor that the midwife said to her, do not fear, you will have this son also. Whoops, typing. And so it was, as her soul was departing, for she died, that she called his name Ben-Oni, and we'll discuss this later. I already have notes on it. But his father called him Benjamin. So one is son of my sorrow, and he is the son of my right hand. And so Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath. And I think all of your Bibles have a parenthetical comment by some priest that this is Bethlehem. So when this is first written by Moses, the people, whatever documents he was using, they called the place Ephrath, but later becomes known as Bethlehem. Sometime in the next couple hundred years after Moses wrote this. And Jacob set a pillar on her grave, which is the pillar of Rachel's grave to this day. And so on and so forth. Okay. And then Genesis 48. Again, Jacob is blessing his sons. He's leading up to the great chapter 49. And he says, but as for me, when I came from Padan, Rachel died beside me. That's a very powerful passage. We talked about that a little bit some time back. Died beside me in the land of Canaan. It's almost if he's holding her in his arms when she died. In the land of Canaan, on the way, in the road, when there was but a little distance to go to Ephrath. So they're just outside the city. Didn't quite make it in, as it were, it sounds like. And I buried her there on the way, on the road to Ephrath. And then again, we have our parenthetical comment. That is Bethlehem. So here we have the evidences from Scripture itself for the city. And it is a city. I want to emphasize with you. It is a city. Ephrath is a city. It is a going concern. It has several founders. The issue is by the time of Jesus' birth, it's not. 1,000 years have gone by. It's no longer a great concern, a great economic concern. And yet all these people are flooding in to the city, and they cannot find a place to sleep because it's a little town. It's not what it once was. Again, when Micah gives his prophecy, you're looking at 4 centuries or so following the time of, or more, around 4 centuries, following the time of Ruth and Boaz. So, okay, so after the conquest of Canaan, it becomes known as Bethlehem of Judah, or perhaps Bethlehem - Judah. Quickly, Judges chapter 12, verse 8. Judges chapter 12, verse 8. And we have this listing of judges. And Jephthah, of course, the famous Jephthah here, and his daughter. If you remember, that was a picture of Christ, right? We don't have time to develop that here, but that is an interesting image here. His only daughter, right? And notice as soon as that story is over, verse 7, chapter 12, verse 7, and Jephthah judged Israel 6 years. Then Jephthah the Gileadite died and was buried in one of the cities of Gilead. After him, Ibzan of Bethlehem judged Israel. Now, I just find it interesting, after that whole Jephthah and his daughter story, that the next judge comes from Bethlehem. So where Jesus would be born, of course, he would be the only son of his father who was sacrificed. Judges chapter 17, and I did spend some time tribulating over this because I wanted to read the whole chapter and we don't have time. But I will leave this on your own. Both Judges chapter 17 and Judges chapter 19. Hey, Kuiper. Hey, buddy. You being a booger? You being a booger? Don't put this away. Judges chapter 17 and 19 deal with Levites that have come out of Bethlehem. There's much more here than what I'm saying right now. The first one, some of you will recognize the story, is where you have this man, Micah, and he hires a Levite, a priest for his household. But remember what the god is? It's a silver idol. Yes, it's judges. There's no king in Israel. Everyone does what's right in their own eyes. That particular, again, go back and read the story. that particular priest, that particular Levite that is hired in the house is from Bethlehem. And then in chapter 19 is that absolutely horrendous story where you have the Levite who ends up, he doesn't really marry the daughter of the, I can't remember if we even told his name. We told the father's name. In the back of my mind, we're not told what his name is, but we could spend time going over this. And so he has the daughter of this man. They end up staying overnight, and these Benjamites, they want to tell me if you recognize this story. Chapter 19, verse 22. Now, as they were enjoying themselves, suddenly certain men of the city, perverted men, surrounded the house and beat on the door. They spoke to the master of the house. The old man saying, again, we're not told his name, bring out the man who came to you, came to your house, that we may know him carnally. This is just like the men at Sodom and Gomorrah, isn't it? And the man says, well, don't rape this man. I'll give you my daughter, who is the concubine, the half-wife of the Levite. And then it's a horrible story. I think we all know it. And then essentially she's raped to death. And then the priest is so upset in verse 29. And when he entered his house, and she died at the threshold, she's dead the next morning. It's just a horrific story. It's just almost unimaginable. And he entered his house, he took a knife, laid hold of his concubine, and dismembered her, cut her into 12 pieces, limb by limb, and sent her, mailed her, as it were, throughout all the territory of Israel, to what we looked at earlier with the 12 tribes. Yeah. And so it was, all who saw it said, quote, no such deed has been done or seen from the day that the children of Israel came up from the land of Egypt until this day. Consider it, take counsel, and speak up. Absolute lawlessness. But it's interesting that these men come from Bethlehem. What's shaken? I don't know. It's other discussions for another day. And then, of course, Ruth chapter 1. Ruth goes hand in hand with the time of Judges. Ruth is a Moabite. And again, we looked at, do you want to look at that again? Here, I'll pull it up for you. Looking there, look good. So here is Judah here. Bethlehem is right in this area here. Ruth is from Moab, and she's traveled somehow or other across the Dead Sea. And she's traveled with her mother-in-law Naomi, and they're in this area right in here. Okay? And verse, I'm sorry, it was not in Ruth. Please excuse me here. And so Ruth is a discussion of life and law and jurisprudence at this time. Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled, so we're simply told that, we don't have to guess, that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn, to travel in the country of Moab, and he and his wife and his 2 sons. And then later on, of course, the son dies. The name of the man is Elimelech. My God is king. The name of his wife was Naomi. The name of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem. So they're called men of Ephrath. in the city of Bethlehem. So we see both names here. And again, just like other cities, other towns, buildings, right? The old name will continue for generations. And that's what we're looking at here. Ephrath has been known as Ephrath. We don't know for how long. Could have been for many centuries. And so people still refer to as Ephrath, and the people from Ephrath as, people from Bethlehem as Ephrathites. What you doing, buddy? Think you can get up there? You want to sit up there? You're welcome to do so. Chapter 2, still in Ruth. Yes, Cheryl, please. You can go ahead and speak up.
Thank you. What was the scripture reference that you just finished with Elimelech and
Ruth? I'm sorry. Make sure we're talking about the same thing. Elimelech, Ruth, chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. You want this?
Thank
buddy?
you.
You're very welcome. And then we're going to go ahead, and I do not want. Hey there, buddy. People want to see you. Look up there. I know he'll look up there. There, I know. There's the beautiful Kuiper. Yes, it's marijuana here, right? It's great name. Ruth chapter 2. We'll go to Ruth chapter 2, and I am going to get him some catnip and what's this other stuff? Valerian. Here, buddy. This will calm you down. There you go. You want it over there? You know you like this, don't you? It calms your tummy, doesn't it? Here, you want it over there? I have to keep teaching. We got to. Oh, Kuiper. Okay, buddy. He always eats this stuff. It calms his stomach, I think. Okay. And so Ruth chapter 2, verse 2. We didn't start in verse 1. And Naomi had kinsmen, family members as her husband's side of the family, a man of great wealth of the family of Elimelech. His name was Boaz. So Ruth the Moabitess, which she's down here, she's not a Hebrew. So Jesus is not a pure Hebrew. He's not a pure Jew. Now what? Rahab is also one of his mothers, right? Oh. And Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, please let me go to the field and glean heads of grain. And we're all familiar with this story since we were children. The gleaning laws, the harvesters were told to, matter of fact, this isn't God's law, do not grab a hold of every grain, let some of it fall to the ground, and then the gleaners, the poor, can come by, and including animals, and pick up what falls on the ground, which is in terms of God's providence. So it's not a welfare system where people are just being handed food, but they are working for it. And so you have Bethlehem is surrounded by these fields. The fields are planted, they're harvested, the grains are then ground into flour, and then they're brought to Bethlehem and they are turned into bread. Bethlehem is a bread baking city. And of course, it's been noted, that's what I ought to say, that Jesus himself is the bread of life, and he is born in the house of bread. And I do think that is part of the point, incidentally. Verse 3, then she left and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and she happened to come to the part of the field that belonged to Boaz. So these are massive fields. And notice they do have boundary marks. Does everyone notice that? These are fields are not held in common. They are personal property. Who is of the family of Abimelech? Excuse me. Elimelech. And behold, now behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said to the reapers, Jehovah be with you. So he lives there. Apparently he has a house there. Jehovah be with you. So Boaz knows God by his covenantal name of Jehovah. And they responded, the workers there in the field hired by Boaz respond with, and Jehovah bless you as well. And so we see here in the story of Boaz that the workers in the field plays a big part of this whole story. So, okay. In wrapping all of this up, and again, you may want to study some of this further on your own. 1 Samuel 17:12, and these are stories that we all recognize. You may not recognize the reference, we all recognize the story. 1 Samuel 17, it's really all the chapter, but pick up in verse 12. Now David was the son of that Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judah. And you got them all there. The writer of Samuel just put it all in there. So David is the son of an Ephrathite, Ephrath, or Ephrathah, of Bethlehem. And which Bethlehem? Not the Bethlehem up in Zebulun, but the Bethlehem in Judah. There's no doubt here of what's going on. Whose name was Jesse. Well, we've heard of Jesse before, right? Who had 8 sons, and the man was old, advanced in years, in the days of Saul, and so on and so forth. So here we see David is clearly is being identified with Bethlehem. And then 1 Chronicles 11. And again, there's much more to this than we have time to pursue. But David is being made king here. What's wrong, Kaipi? 1 Chronicles 11:15. And he's been made king. And it's at this time in history that the Philistines actually occupy Bethlehem. Well, that's David's town. But these Mycenaean Greeks, these Philistines, actually occupy the area. Now, 3 of the 30 chief men went down to the rock to David into the cave of Adullam. It's a whole large story. And the army of the Philistines encamped in the valley of Rephaim. David was then in the stronghold, and the garrison of the Philistines was then in Bethlehem. So the Philistines are occupying Bethlehem. And then, if you'll notice, in 2 Samuel 23, gotta stop and think here. 2 Samuel 23, again, the ones in Chronicles dealing with the history of the canon, yet this Kings and Samuel deals with history as history. 2 Samuel 23, 14. And again, I know you recognize this. And this again is being referenced again in Chronicles. Verse 13. Then 3 of the 30 chief men, these are David's mighty warriors, it's his bodyguard, went down at harvest time and came to David the cave of Adullam, and the troop of Philistines encamped in the valley of Rephaim. David was then in the stronghold, and the garrison of the Philistines was then in Bethlehem. And David said with longing, oh, that someone would give me a drink of the water from the well of Bethlehem, which is by the gate. So he wants some of his own water. He likes its taste, right? So the three mighty men broke through the camp of the Philistines, drew water from the well of Bethlehem that was by the gate. And so again, folks, this is a going concern. If it has a gate, it has a wall. So this is just not some third-rate backwater hillbilly town. It's a going economic concern that has a wall around it in order to protect it. We could look at the archaeology of these things, and we don't have time this evening. Verse 16, that was by the gate, and took it and brought it to David. Nevertheless, he would not drink it, but poured it out as a sacrifice unto the Lord. And he said, far be it from me, O Lord, that I should do this. Is this not the blood of men who went in jeopardy of their lives? Therefore he would not drink it. These things were done by the three mighty men. Now Abishai, the brother of Joab, the son of Zeruiah, was chief of another three men. He lifted up his spear, and so on and so forth. My point is, there's much more to read in all this. I'll let you read for yourself. This is all outside of Bethlehem, right? So, oh, and then finally, for what it's worth, 2 Chronicles 11:6. Which would be coming up towards the end of the Old Testament, actually. 2 Chronicles 11, verse 6, we have the King Rehoboam. Verse 1, now when Rehoboam came to Jerusalem, he assembled, so that's, he's in this area here, Jabez. I'm lost. From the house of Judah and Benjamin, 180,000 chosen men who were his warriors to fight against Israel, that he might restore the kingdom to Rehoboam. But the word of Jehovah came to Shammai, the man of God, saying, and so on and so forth. And we get to verse 6, verse 5. So Rehoboam dwelt in Jerusalem and built cities for defense in Judah. So they're castles and fortress cities. And he built Bethlehem, Etam, Tekoa, and so on and so forth. In verse 10, Zorah, Ayalon, and Hebron, which are in Judah, and Benjamin, which is just to the west. Benjamin's right here. So here's Judah. Here's Benjamin, the north. Comma, fortified cities. So once again, these are going economic concerns. They're powerful politically. They have their fortress. They're fortified. They have fortresses. They have walls, massive walls around them to protect them from warfare. And then they have the concomitant gates that go with them. And then verse 23, he dealt wisely and dispersed some of his sons throughout all the territories of Judah and Benjamin to every fortified city, all the fortresses. Okay, so yeah, here's Bethlehem. We don't think of Bethlehem like that when Jesus is born, but Jesus is born, several centuries later, nearly 1,000 years later, and the Bethlehem of David is not the Bethlehem when Jesus is born there. He's still the matter they have shepherds in the field. It's another issue as to whether or not they were even growing that many crops at the time, if they were grazing their sheep. So we have a few minutes left, and so yeah, that's what I had to present this evening, without going through Judges chapter 17 and 19, which is maybe a little bit off the beaten path. I don't know. But it is interesting, those Levites do come from Bethlehem. Remember, the Levites do not have any particular land. When the land was divided up at the conquest, the Levites did not have any land. They were spread throughout the entire land. So, okie dokie. I hope this information helps you have a greater appreciation for the Bethlehem where the greater son of David was born in fulfillment of prophecy, and would come out of Bethlehem to rule all of Israel, to rule all the world. So, okay. Comments, questions? Like I said, I knew I probably wouldn't go the full hour and a half, but there's not enough time to start anything else. Then next week we'll return to our Genesis discussions with Jacob and Esau. It's just been what, a couple months now, I guess. 6 weeks, more than 6 weeks. It's probably about 10 weeks. So. Have I gone over with you what Scripture says at the end? Have I gone over that with you? The word, and I don't have it here with me, sorry. I can't remember if I've gone over this with you or not. What you're dealing with these houses, they look like this. Have I gone over this with you? It's very distinctive. Incidentally, the letter Beit in Hebrew looks like this. And it's a house. The word bet means house. Beth is house. It looks like a house, a floor, a wall, the ceiling. And they look like this. And these are found all over Israel. I have no idea why this ink is red. That's it. And then you'd have a courtyard out here as well. And have a gate on it. A gate here. Now you could also have a shared courtyard and have another house over here, like we see with Annas and Sapphira. Annas and who's the other high priest in Israel? I just had a complete mental breakdown here. Annas and starts with the C. What's his name? His son-in-law. Annas is the high priest. Who's his son-in-law? And anyway, Jesus goes.
Caiaphas.
What? Caiaphas. Thank you. I couldn't come up with that to save my soul. Thank you. Caiaphas. And you see here that you say, well, is it Caiaphas' house or is it Annas' house? Well, it's because they're sharing a courtyard. That's where Peter's at. And so then you have the house here. You have these pillars here. Pillar here and a pillar here. Pillar here, pillar here. And the pillars are holding up. There's going to be a second level up here, right? So yeah, the leveled house, I think you're familiar with. And so you have your animals down here. These are your animals down here. And then you live up here. Then you have your beds and everything up here, as it were. Makes sense? And so then you have your stalls down here for your animals, including what? Well, including bins to keep the animal fodder in, correct? And so you'd keep your animals with you, not only to keep them from being stolen, but to keep them from predators and whatnot. But most of you, as I think, have been around large animals like horses and donkeys and things. They give off a lot of heat. And so if you have these animals down here, they're giving off a lot of heat for the bedrooms up here. Makes sense? But you'd have this room right here, and I can't remember what it is in Greek. And And the issue is, it's a spare room back here. It could be used as a mother-in-law room. It could be used like with Ruth and Naomi. It could be used for storage. It could be used for a guest room. And this is what the early early translators are struggling with. They don't know exactly what this room is. They do know that people stay in it. They could figure that out from other usages. But now we know it's just a spare room that had many usages. As a matter of fact, if your house is up against the city wall here, during times of siege and warfare, they would take this room and they would fill it with rubble in order to fortify the fortress wall. So this is where Jesus is born. He's born in one of these spare rooms. It says there was no room in the inn. Well, there were no spare rooms. They couldn't find these spare rooms because these people had come from all over Israel, and perhaps even the empire, probably to take these loyalty oaths. And there are a lot of people who lived in Bethlehem. Their families had come from Bethlehem over the previous 1,000 years. And everyone's house is packed. And of course, so Jesus is laid in a manger. Well, of course, there's going to be mangers here. Now, often, perhaps you've heard it said that, well, Jesus was born in a barn. Well, it's not born in a barn. It's born in a shed or something. The place where they kept animals. This is my point. That's not what's going on here. It's not an inn. It's not a shed. It's not a barn. This is the way the Hebrew houses were structured. And the animals are with them. They live with them. And so later on, when the Magi come by and Jesus is 3 years old or whatever, 2 or 3 years old, a toddler. And we're told they were in a house. It could be the same house. Could be another house. We're not told. That makes sense? Anyone? All that makes sense? So this is very typical Hebrew house, the U-shaped thing, the pillars, 2 stories, spare room back here. Jesus had been born in the spare room, laid in a manger, which had been right there. Could be made out of wood, could be made out of stone, very likely. And so he was laid in a manger. Make sense? So that's what's going on there. Away in a manger. Okie dokie.
Okie dokie, Doug, we appreciate you.
Well, thank you, Rob, and I appreciate you saying that.
All right. You have a good week. We'll see you next week.
You as well. Thank you, everyone. In the words of George Burns, say good night, Gracie. So,
Night, Gracie.
Night, Gracie. And it's good seeing everyone. And I hope to see everyone sooner than later. Okay. So, the Lord bless you. Good night now.